Hello and welcome to the Insurgencies podcast. I'm Nicholas Kosmatopoulos and I'm the host of the podcast. Today we're very honored and happy to host renowned historian, journalist, globetrotter and director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, Vijay Prashad. He's in Beirut. Welcome to Beirut, Vijay. Welcome back to Beirut. Vijay is not a stranger to Beirut. He has been here and at AUB and at the Aysam Fares Institute actually for some years before. And he's always coming back to Beirut. He's here on a trip to meet people and to have conversations. And of course, we didn't want to miss the chance to get him on board the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Vijay.
Did you say boatcast or podcast?
Podcast.
Okay, it's very nice. I like that. Boatcast, podcast.
But I think maybe I should use the podcast. It's not a bad idea.
You're a boatcaster.
So welcome.
Thanks.
How are you today?
Well, it's a beautiful day. There's the sun out. The Mediterranean is shining. We are 100 kilometers away from the Zionist state. It is surreal to imagine that there's a genocide taking place, again, just, hundreds of kilometers away. It's something surreal about the world in which we live.
True, truly, yeah. But at the same time, there are some people who are trying to do something about it, apart from those in Palestine who are resisting by all means, right? And to take you back to the theme of the podcast or the boatcast, I want to ask you about the ships that practically are on the way as we speak now to Gaza. The Global Sumud Flotilla is an international effort of 44 countries, 66 ships, if I'm not wrong, that are now meeting in the middle of the Mediterranean from Tunis, from Barcelona, even from Greece. 2 days ago, they left and they're headed to Gaza. What do you think of this effort?
Well, it's a reminder first that Gaza has been under Israeli occupation since at least 1967. It's a reminder because some people might imagine that somehow Gaza is an independent country which on the 7th of October 2023 declared war on Israel. In fact, that's a nonsensical argument. Gaza has been occupied, is part of the UN mandated occupied Palestinian territories. Israel, in fact, patrols Gaza's borders, all but a small slice which is patrolled by Egypt, the Rafah border crossing, and then the sea. And that's where the sea comes in, because Israel patrols the sea. Gazan fisher people, Palestinian fisher people in Gaza, when they go out to fish in the Mediterranean, have been routinely harassed by the Israeli Navy, prevented from going out into deeper waters to fish for, larger catches and so on. And by the way, at the start of this genocide, as part of the genocide, as part of the policy to inflict hunger on the Palestinians, very ill-reported part of it was the destruction of the Palestinian fishing boats in Gaza. I mean, the Israelis bombed the bakeries. They bombed the capacity of Palestinians in Gaza to feed themselves, but then they destroyed the boats, which is, an act itself of criminality to prevent the people of Gaza from feeding themselves. So the sea is the one opening where the people of Gaza have been able to go slightly outside their borders. Again, policed, harassed, and boats destroyed. The sea is the only place from which aid could come in of this form. It's the only place from which solidarity could come in. The Israelis would simply not permit solidarity to come from anywhere else, let alone, their collaborators in Egypt would not allow solidarity missions into Gaza. So the sea is the only way. There used to be an airport in Gaza. People may not remember. There was the Yasser Arafat airport near Rafah. In 2001, it was destroyed. There is no airport in Gaza.
By the Israelis, yeah.
Yes, it was destroyed by the Israelis. There is no airport in Gaza. So the only way to get there is by the sea. And this is, of course, not the first flotilla. There have been flotillas in previous conflicts. I was just looking at an issue of Journal of Palestine Studies, 2009, an essay by Azmi Bishara called The Israeli Assault on Gaza. I mean, every year you can have the same title, Israeli Assault on Gaza, Israeli Assault on Gaza, Israel, at least since 2007. Every single year, punctually the summertime, Israel has bombed Gaza. Yeah. And every time in the last few years, groups of people have said, let us make a flotilla. The Mavi Marwara was the first, let us go across.
I was there, you know.
Yes, you were on that board. Let us go to Gaza and so on. So this idea is not new. It's a good idea.
How's different today? How different it is today?
It's not different. That's the real issue. I mean, the fact that there are more boats is not, to me, different. I mean, there's also greater desperation. There's a great sense of demoralization. Nothing can be done to stop the genocide. Look, you know, Gaza 2014, within days, 3,000 people killed. But nobody was using the term genocide. Now the term genocide has been used for months on end. I mean, it's pretty bizarre that the United Nations on September 16, 2025 released a statement saying, well, it is a genocide. Thanks a lot. I mean, this has been a term already in usage. But nonetheless, this, you know, the fact that there's a recurrent use of a word like genocide to define the 2, 3, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people killed and injured in Gaza, the whole place basically turned into, sort of landscape of the moon. All of that, and then people feel despite their protests, tens of thousands, million people on the street, can't stop it, you know, can't stop the Israelis, can't stop the Europeans, can't stop the Americans, can't stop them, demoralization. There is a sense of frustration with this flotilla. It's not a triumphant move, let's break the siege and so on. It's just desperation.
So you think that this is the last chance we have to, for the global society, global civil society, solidarity to do something about it? Since that, there have been some efforts before at the topical level. There has also been a march to Gaza in Egypt, as you know, a few months ago. But this has been, I think, the only sustained international gathering where people from all different nations come together and they meet at the sea. It has also a symbolism, no? I mean, somehow Palestinian self-determination and Palestinian anti-colonial struggle has been always about land, as also Zionist takeover has been about land, but the sea has never been so central as it is today. And I think it's, as you said, it is of course a practical corridor that brings people aid, through, because everything else is stopped and blocked. But at the same time, there must be something more to it, because it's not just a practical corridor. There is a symbolism that allows people to meet beyond borders, and then all of those people who meet, they go to Palestine. So there is a form of pilgrimage, if you wish, to a land not only of genocide but also a land of resistance, right?
But let's not underestimate the sea.
Yeah.
All the times I've been to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where effectively the Palestinians have been under a kind of lockdown. The phrase is used that Gaza is the largest open-air prison in the world. I don't know why people forget that the West Bank is equally a prison, and the West Bank is a prison in which the prison guards have set up residence. In other words, the settlements.
Yeah.
It's a very strange kind of prison. But Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem don't have freedom of mobility. Yeah. They can't come out of the West Bank and even travel to visit family in Gaza or go to other parts of Israel 1948. It's not available. And I once had a very nice conversation with a group of young people. And what they were saying is that they have never seen the sea. And it strikes me as really strange and cruel, because, we talk about these entities, Israel or the West Bank, as if they are enormous places. I come from India, where it's enormous. I live in Santiago in Chile. Chile is an enormous, long country abutting the ocean. It's a really long territory. The entity called Israel or Palestine, these are tiny places. You know, you can drive. I once met a taxi driver who must have been 1,000 years old, because he said to me, I used to drive a taxi before 1948, and it used to be from Beirut to Jerusalem 1 hour. Yeah, and then to Damascus, and then back to Beirut. He did the triangle run.
Within half a day.
Yeah, you know, within a day, half a day or a day, you know, as it were. The distance between, let's say, Ramallah and the beach is nothing. But yet, children, it's not even that they've never been to the beach, they've never seen the sea.
Yeah.
And they will never be permitted to see it in any other way than in photographs or in video. And that's incredible. And they long for the sea. Why? Because Palestinians in that part of the world have lived in proximity to the sea for centuries. It's not that necessarily Palestinians were seafaring people or anything. You know, there's no mythology of seafaring like the great Phoenician mythology of the seafaring nature and so on. But the fact that children have not been able to go to the sea or see the sea is incredible. And I want to keep on this for a moment, because I remember in 2014 when the Israelis killed the 4 kids playing football on the beach in Gaza. You see, that's what Palestinian kids would do if they could access the sea on this side of the Mediterranean, just south of this sea here, you know, from AUB beach all the way down to, you know, the beaches just south of here. If they could access that, they would play football, they would run into the water, they would do those things.
Yeah.
Also, the people might benefit from natural gas that sits off the water. I mean, we know that the sea is important for Lebanon because Lebanon contests natural gas rights. We know that there are natural gas rights off the coast of Gaza. We know that the sea is also opportunity, it's also resources. It's more than those things. That's from the Palestinian standpoint, which, you know, is important to put at the center of things. It's true that you know, certainly solidarity is about transit. You know, within the very term, I am here territorially, you are there territorially, I'm offering you solidarity. It's a territorial concept in a way,
Absolutely.
right? You know, I'm offering you solidarity. That means I have to transit from where I am to where you are. And of course, the sea is the great connector. You know, yes, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, these are great connectors.
Absolutely. But also what you said is fascinating to apply on the sea, because the connection that used to be on land, you know, how easily connected Jerusalem to Beirut to Damascus was. That was also the case with the sea. You know, Cairo, Alexandria in that case, with Piraeus, you know, Beirut, there were so many more maritime connections. People could travel much more. And despite the fact that ships were much slower, you know, and communication was not much great that they are today, GPS, you know, was not around, the connections were much more dense. So the same fragmentation that you described, even more, of course, extreme on the West Bank and Gaza and so on in Palestine and in the region, has been happening also at sea. And the sea between, you know, our people, the Mediterranean, has turned into an ocean practically that kills people, right? Try to cross it. Hence, my question, and how, as you also mentioned it very nicely, the sea is a conduit. It's also a space where people move from one place to another to pledge solidarity, but at the same time, I think they reconnect, they reunite, they turn it into indeed a place that unites and not necessarily kills or you know, estranges and alienates. And I think this is the hope, right, that we have also to think about the Mediterranean Sea as a sea that can reunite and can reconnect.
It's a connector, but let's stay with the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean peoples. You know, I love stories of people who are in the wrong place, yeah, who seemingly shouldn't belong there. In the 1930s, there was a great republic in Spain, and the Spanish Republic, its founding ideology was to bring all the people together of Spain against fascism, against, you know, imperialism and so on. when General Franco, who was the military commander in Morocco of Spanish forces, decided to cross the Mediterranean, come back to Spain, to Andalusia, and to proceed towards Madrid to destroy the Spanish Republic, people from all over the world came to join the Spanish Republic to defend it.
And some of them on boats, by the
A
way.
lot on boats. But interestingly, they came from China, they came from India, and from Palestine. The Palestinian story most interested me. Why?
Oh, I didn't
See, General Franco brought with him a number of Moroccan troops because he was in the Moroccan command to fight against the Republic. So what the Spanish Republic decided was they needed to find Arabic speakers to go to the front lines. And there were a group of Palestinians who had come from Palestine to Spain to defend the Republic because they were communists. And so in Spain, rather than have them be in the Bureau of Information and so on in Madrid, where they would write things in Arabic for the Arabic press, the Republican authorities sent them to the front lines, where these Palestinians used to stand there with the old megaphone, which was, just basically a tube that they would yell in Levantine Arabic, yelling to the Moroccan troops
Who could not understand it.
who didn't understand it, telling them, why are you fighting for this fascist? You should come to our side
over.
and defend the Republic.
Yeah.
And that was the Palestinian solidarity with the Spanish Republic. Now, maybe 10, 12 people. But when I think about the people in Spain who are demonstrating now for Palestine, I want to tell them, friends, you are not doing the Palestinians a favor. You see, solidarity is not charity. It's not that, the big-hearted Spaniards are feeling so bad for... The Palestinians came and stood with you in your time of need.
That's true.
Now you must stand with them in their time of struggle.
So how would you define the good struggle for solidarity? What would that be then today? What should they do?
Well, remember,
They cross the sea.
Solidarity is really an open-ended term. There is no good and bad solidarity. Emmanuel Macron can give a speech, or Christian Merz can give a speech saying we stand in solidarity with the Israelis in the fight against terrorism. There is no good and bad solidarity. Solidarity is a class question.
Yeah.
It just depends which side of
From
the
your
line you
perspective,
stand on.
What would you say to the Spaniards today? I mean, they did interrupt Vuelta, for example, 3 days ago. Another event that moves around Spain, with bicycles, but then there was no bicycles to move around because the Israeli team participated, and the Spaniards, they went in and disrupted the whole thing. It didn't really work out. So it can also be about boycotting, maybe about disruptions, I guess, about fighting at the symbolic and also organizational level, right? I mean, this is,
It can be all
BDS
kinds of
kind
things.
thing.
It can be all kinds of things. It depends on the mood of people, their confidence, their bravery, and so on. But it also depends on what's effective. Like for instance, it is effective today to say that why should Europeans, just speaking, if I were European, I would say, why should Israel participate in Eurovision or in the European Football League? Expel them. Firstly, they are not even a European country. They are Asian. Let them go and participate in the Asian Football Cup, and let the Asians ban them. And let them be isolated. Let them participate in the American Football League or whatever.
Where they really deserve to
Yeah,
be.
they should participate in the baseball league or whatever. It's an American state.
Yeah.
It's not part of Asia. It has never been part of Asia. In fact, we should reject it in all forums. I quite agree with the Irish president, Michelle Higgins, who said the other day that both Israel and all countries that are complicit in the genocide should be ejected from the UN. I think it's a correct statement.
Yeah.
But solidarity, actions of solidarity, these are not empty statements because these are all class questions. Because you can have lots of people in solidarity with Israel. The term solidarity itself is not necessarily restricted for the good side of history.
Absolutely,
Yeah, it can be quite ugly. There are flotillas going to Israel. What are those flotillas? Flotillas carrying weapons. flotillas carrying coal,
I want to ask you
flotillas carrying oil and so on. Those are also the great global flotillas for the Israelis.
I want to ask you about this, going back to the sea exactly, and how some unions, labor unions, some of them also in India. I want to ask you about that. Definitely some in Europe, the southern part of Europe, Italy, Spain, Greece, to an extent, also have moved to action, either to block or to deny loading ships that carry weapons to Israel. And as far as I know, this is something much more concrete, much more labor-based, class action. How would you see that part? I mean, and what's the situation in the other part of Asia, India and so on? Are there unions there taking action about that? And is there any connection? Because, India and Israel have, as far as I know, a really good connection that transfers also goods from one place to the other.
Yeah, I mean, let's go systematically one by one on that, because this is really interesting and important. It's true that a number of trade unions, around the world, in South Africa, in Australia, in India, I'll get to India in a minute, of course in Belgium, in Italy and so on, have refused to transit sometimes all Israeli goods, sometimes arms, sometimes energy. You had the government of Colombia saying we are not going to license the sale of coal, which is actually a really big step for a government to make, because you have to intervene in private decision making and so on. So there is that. That is certainly there. It takes some effort for a trade union to get involved in this, because these are political actions. Trade unions generally don't get involved in political decisions. Very rarely, it comes once in a while, whether it's in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, trade unions involve themselves. In this case, in the genocide, trade unions involving themselves. But it's actually very rare for trade unions to move from economic action to political action. And we don't see it that often in world history. So it's really quite extraordinary for a trade union to make these decisions. Let's go directly to India, because this is interesting. In India, the left has had a very strong position on the genocide, but before that, on the occupation of Palestinian destiny for a very long time. The left has taken a strong position, the communist left, very strong position. In fact, about 10 or some years ago, the All India Kisan Sabha, which is the farmers' movement, 16 million members of the farmers' movement, it's a mass organization, 16 million members, not a small group, voted unanimously to join BDS, Boycott, Divest, Sanctions of Israel, about a decade ago. So this is a process, has been there. Last year, the Indian dock loaders and dock workers organization, also a trade union relatively dominated by the communists, decided enough is enough. We are not going to load any ships that are carrying weapons to Israel or weapons components to Israel. This is an interesting decision, because it is true that India was selling certain components, weapons components to Israel, and also importing weapons from Israel. So the union said we will also not unload the ships. They got a huge pushback from the government. The government said, we'll shut down, we'll go to emergency footing and so on. And they had to fight a fight, because, in fact, as I said, for a union to make a political decision is enormous, because it puts the livelihoods of your workers in jeopardy. Because in particularly dock workers and so on, the state has the right to come in and displace the employed workers and bring in the military or somebody, to fulfill these jobs. You can sack them. It's a very tough, because it's borderline essential services. It's the docks.
Of course, logistics.
So it was very brave of the unions to take the position. India itself is in a way, the horns of a dilemma for a couple of reasons. One, India has a historical relationship with Palestine. It's the first country in the world to recognize the Palestinians with diplomatic, relations. In fact, Yasser Arafat used to say that Indira Gandhi was his sister, and when he came to India, he used to be met at the airport by the Prime Minister herself. would go and greet him and so on. India had a very close relationship with the Palestinian cause and always took it up at the UN and so on. When the Soviet Union collapsed and India had to reassess its relations in the world, it was made very clear to the Indian government, a government of the center right, made very clear to them that the road to Washington had to go through Tel Aviv. And India was in that sense forced to normalize relations with Israel. Not because of any other reason than the US said you can't deal with us, the great hegemon, unless you normalize with Israel. Then in 1998, India, for the second time, first time was 1974, tested nuclear weapons. When they tested nuclear weapons, the US Congress has a stipulation that any proliferator of nuclear weaponry cannot buy certain weapon systems from the US. So India turned to Israel and started buying the exact same weapon systems which the Israeli industries make, state venture weapons company makes alongside Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. It's a very interesting way of going around US law. Israel's main weapon sales are basically US weapons,
yeah,
which are made alongside joint ventures.
But they're not under sanctions. Or what?
No.
You know, the American...
No, it's a well-known loophole.
Yeah.
Everywhere, it's plain light of day. So India started buying Israeli weapons for that reason. When the right-wing government, far right-wing government came, they have a close emotional link with the Israeli far right because they are both deeply anti-Muslim. That's what unites them. And terrorism is this idea that they have. But even this right-wing government is trapped because they are part of the BRICS bloc. So they can't go all out and say we support Israel. Right now, Mr. Modi said, thanks to Netanyahu for wishing me his 75th birthday. It's his birthday.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he can't come out and say, we stand with Israel. He can't travel to Israel and stand with the flag and say, kill all the Palestinians. It's not possible. Also because India has close relations with the Gulf Arab states. It becomes difficult. Just as the Gulf Arab states are duplicitous regarding Israel, that means India has to be duplicitous regarding Israel. So it's a complicated place. Within India, the government tried to prevent protests for Palestine, but couldn't do it because there's just too much public support for the Palestinians. So India is in a complicated position. In a way, much like China. It's a very complex relationship with this region.
Would you put them on par with China?
No, not at all. Yeah. It's slightly different with the Chinese. I mean, people say, why don't the Chinese come and do something? Well, let's go back to the sea. Your interest is the sea. Well, out there in the Eastern Mediterranean, the United States has warships. You can't see them with the naked eye, but they are out there. They have blockaded the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, they are not going to stop the flotilla. Why? Because the United States doesn't want to put itself in the position of a giant US warship blocking little dinghies effectively. The Israelis don't care. They will drone them, they will bomb them, they've already done that. They don't care. The Americans don't want that photograph of a giant US warship blocking. But I think the Chinese quite rightly worry that if they sent in 2 ships to come and break the blockade, bring aid, set up a hospital, put this, that and the other, there will be an incident of the waters which will be like the Cuban Missile Crisis at that level.
They will draw them into a war, you think?
Well, if not a war, they will have a standoff.
Yeah.
And the Chinese don't want to do this. I mean, it's not reported much, but the United States has blockaded the waters here. It is not going to permit, and they do it in the way they are doing it is they are saying they want to prevent Iranian ships from coming to resupply Hezbollah.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. They also have all different kind of excuses for that. But going back to China and the sea, Chinese have also worked with Israel. There is a port of Haifa that they have been practically owning, or at least trying to set up as part of the BRI, right? BRI. So how about them at least giving up on the port as an action of, okay, you don't have to actively assist, but just divest?
So this is interesting because in fact the port is largely owned and managed by Adani, the Indian company. He also owns two ports in Greece. And he was the principal beneficiary of the India, Middle East, Europe trade corridor because he owns the port in Gujarat personally. He was going to use the Dubai port, which is owned by Dubai Ports.
The DP, yeah.
Yeah, and they were going to come up Saudi Arabia, come to Haifa, which in fact he owns most of the container terminal at the port, and then go to Greece, where he owns both ports. It's very interesting. This was going to dangerously normalize Saudi Arabia with Israel in a de facto way. And it was signed just before October 7th, 2023. So, of course, in the internet, people say, well, October 7th was to prevent this. I don't think operationally these things can be done so quickly. But anyway, yeah, the Chinese do have investments, they have business deals and so on. But also we need to worry about the term Chinese. And I'll say what I mean there. In Colombia, the Colombian government of Gustavo Petro did something interesting because he blanket withdrew licenses for sale of coal to Israel. So for private companies to buy coal privately in Colombia and carry it privately and sell it privately to Israel was stopped. The Chinese say that the state is not involved in these things, it's private companies. Now, I smile at that and say, look, in Chinese private companies, the state is always involved and you can always close it down. The other thing they say is they have slowed it down. Well, slowed it down is one thing, but symbolically it would be interesting to close it down, not to slow it down. And that is a political decision, which I hope that the Chinese will come to make before, in a way. I mean, it's a reputational question. Like, you want to build a new world, it's not a good look. Yeah, you should close this down. I quite agree. But I do understand that there are all kinds of political complexities, and they are also struggling within China. There are, China is a country, there's 100 million people in the Communist Party. There's enormous divergence of opinion. And people don't really understand this region very much. It's not really on the radar very much. It's a relatively politically insular world. And to teach people about this region is important. The Israelis have been very, very smart in selling themselves as like startup nation, tech nation, and all this stuff. Most of it is garbage, but they've been clever at doing that. And I would say that, it's been a long time since the Palestinians have been able to sell a project. It is impressive that the 14 Palestinian factions met in Beijing to develop a common political agenda. But, there isn't really a popular understanding of Palestine. And this is not an innocent problem. The question I would say is, well, why is Marwan Barghouti in jail 24 years? Why is Ahmad al-Sadat jailed 24 years? I mean, the Israelis have effectively decapitated Palestinian politics, so you don't have the kind of people who could go to Beijing and say, look, this is our view.
There has also been a policy of killing, the brains and the talents behind that. Beyond, the engineers, the poets, whatever they do, they definitely decapitate the whole society. But I want to ask you actually a question about what you just said about the new, the project as a global project. Palestine, we discussed, of course, there's not enough to discuss there, but about the global project that you have written a lot, written about the darker nations, you've written about the Bandung, you also are one of the most prolific authors on the multipolar world. This is also the work that the Tricontinental does. Where does the sea belong to this new world? How does it, is it a place only where trade would again pacify the world? Are we going back to kind of an Adam Smithian perception of the sea, where the BRI has its own project there, and the sea is going to be just a place where ships are going to go up and down, bringing trade, most of them made in China for the rest of the world, and this is the place of the sea in this new multipolar world, or is there something more to it?
Of course, there's a lot more to it. First, let's start. I told you I live in Chile, which is a Pacific country. And the Pacific Islands are disappearing in the sea because, people are doing nothing about the melting of the ice caps. As the ice caps melt, waters rise and islands are disappearing and people will lose their livelihood and homes. So the sea is extremely important for people in that part of the world who are already seeing, we've already seen several islands disappear in the Pacific. So this is a very fundamental issue. But let's stay with the Pacific again. The Pacific is effectively, it's not even, our sea. The great old phrases, Mare Nostrum and things. It's a military sea. What do you have in the Pacific? The United States has 900 overseas military bases. And many of them are in the Pacific, increasingly in the Pacific. Whether it's Okinawa, the giant bases, south in the Guam, from Okinawa
Hawaii.
down to Guam, Hawaii.
Totally
they may not
militarized.
have the Hawaii base anymore. The Hawaiians want it out. But small bases, refueling stations, there are islands there which have been polluted by the French nuclear testing. I mean, the Pacific is a place of war. It's a place of war making, not trade. It's war making more than anything. Ghastly, really ghastly. And the kind of new Cold War being fought in places like the Solomon Islands and so on, where, countries say, look, we want to trade with China, and the US says, sorry, you can't. I mean, it's a little bit like when the Chinese said, we want to build a big port in Lebanon, and the Americans said, no, you can't do it. And that was the end of that investment. You see this all the time in the Pacific. So the water is not just about trade, it's war, it's climate change, disappearance of livelihood. And then, sadly, if people bother to read the, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, it's a place where, the reefs are disappearing, biodiversity is going. I mean, look what's happening under the water, what's going on there. The IPCC reports on biodiversity are horrible to read. I look at the text there about how they say that, well, the reefs can recover. They always say, but there is a point at which the reefs will no longer recover. They will die. And we are near that point. So what does that even mean for maritime life? Forget humans. That's a human-centric view often we take. What's on top of the water? Well, what's below? They are screaming at us. The whales and people, the plankton is saying, what the hell? Can we please survive?
So hopefully there is a place for the sea in this kind of new world that is emerging, from the debris of the old world, and it's not just about war and confrontation, and especially confrontation against nature, right? Singing it even further. On that note, I want to thank you, Vijay, for being on the podcast. I think we're going to be using that term from now on. Quoting you, of course, it's something that you brought up to this podcast, and hopefully we're going to have you again when things look a bit more optimistic in Palestine and the world. But having you around, I think you also definitely help making things more optimistic, and that's good to have you here and have you around and see you in the next episode, hopefully. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.